I was working the front desk at a boutique hotel in Amsterdam when an American couple walked in at 11:30 at night. They had just arrived from the airport and seemed surprised that the lobby was dim and quiet. The man looked around and said, "Is there a bar or something? We need drinks and maybe some burgers." I explained that our bar closed at 10, and most restaurants in the neighborhood were already shut down for the night. He stared at me like I had just told him the earth was flat. You've already noticed. I don't just tell travel stories, I decode behavior. Most channels react. I research. If that's the kind of perspective you value, this is where you subscribe. "But we're hungry," he said, as if that fact alone should reopen every kitchen in the city. His wife pulled out her phone and started searching for delivery options. "Why doesn't Uber Eats have more choices?" she asked. I tried to explain that in Amsterdam, most places close by 10 or 11 on weeknights because people here value rest and quiet hours. The concept seemed completely foreign to them. They eventually found a kebab shop that was still open and left confused about why a major European city shuts down so early. Another American guest I checked in that same week asked me where he could rent a car to drive around Amsterdam. I asked why he needed a car when the city has trams, bikes, and metros everywhere. He said he didn't trust public transport and preferred the freedom of driving. I gently mentioned that parking in Amsterdam costs about €50 a day. The streets are narrow and filled with cyclists, and most locals don't even own cars. He looked skeptical. "How do people get around then?" he asked. I pointed out the window at the hundreds of bicycles parked outside. He laughed and said, "Yeah, but for real transportation." He rented the car anyway. 2 days later, he came back to the desk looking exhausted. He had spent 3 hours trying to find parking, got honked at by cyclists, and received 2 traffic tickets for entering a restricted zone. "Why didn't anyone warn me?" he asked. I had warned him. He just didn't believe it would actually be that hard. My colleague told me about a family from Texas who checked in during summer and immediately cranked the air, conditioning in their room to what they called a comfortable temperature, which was about 16 degrees Celsius. The father came down an hour later to complain that the AC wasn't working properly. My colleague went up to check and found the room freezing cold like a refrigerator. The system was working perfectly. The family just wanted it even colder. She explained that European AC units are designed differently and that most hotels keep rooms around 22 degrees because that's considered comfortable here. The father shook his head and said, "In America, we like it cold. You guys must just be used to sweating." They ended up opening windows and running the AC at full blast simultaneously, which made absolutely no sense. This level of cultural breakdown doesn't just happen by accident. I track these stories full-time so you don't have to. Most people miss what they reveal about mindset. Don't be one of them. When they checked out, their energy bill had a surcharge, and they were genuinely shocked that wasting electricity could cost extra money. These weren't isolated incidents. Over the years, I watched a pattern emerge. It wasn't that Americans were bad travelers. It was that many arrived in Europe expecting it to work exactly like home. And when it didn't, they saw it as Europe's problem, not a difference to adapt to. I was working at a cafe in Berlin when an American woman came in and sat down at a table. She waited and waited. After about 10 minutes, she waved me over, looking annoyed. "Is anyone going to take my order?" she asked. I explained that in Germany, you go to the counter to order and pay, then sit down. She looked around and saw other customers doing exactly that. "That's so inconvenient," she said. "In the States, servers come to you." I nodded and said that here, it's just a different system. She huffed, got up, ordered her coffee, and then asked if I could bring it to her table. I said sure. When I brought it over, she asked where the cream and sugar were. I pointed to the station by the counter. She sighed loudly. "You really make people work for their coffee here." The irony was that she had spent more energy complaining than it would have taken to just grab the cream herself. Another time, A group of Americans came into the cafe talking at full volume. They were laughing, telling stories, and their voices echoed through the entire space. The cafe was small, and most of the other customers were working on laptops or reading quietly. After a few minutes, an older German man at the next table leaned over and politely asked them to lower their voices. One of the Americans looked offended. "We're just having a conversation," she said. The man nodded and said, "Yes, but everyone can hear it." The group didn't understand why this was a problem. They quieted down for about 2 minutes, then gradually got loud again. Eventually, the German man packed up his things and left. One of the Americans noticed and said, "People here are so uptight." But the truth was, they were just used to American volume levels, where talking loudly in public is normal. In many parts of Europe, it's considered inconsiderate. I once saw an American tourist walk into a quiet tram in Prague with a phone call on speaker. He was talking about work stuff, negotiations, some deal he was closing. Everyone on the tram turned to look at him. A woman near me whispered to her friend in Czech, something that roughly translated to, "Only Americans do this." The man didn't notice or didn't care. He kept talking for a full 10 minutes. When he finally hung up, he looked around and smiled at people like he had just finished a performance. No one smiled back. He got off at the next stop, oblivious to the fact that he had annoyed an entire tram full of people. My friend, who works at a hotel in Paris, told me about an American family who complained because their room didn't have enough outlets for all their devices. They had brought 6 phones, 3 tablets, 2 laptops, and a portable speaker. The father asked if the hotel could install more outlets in the room. My friend explained that the building was from the 18th century and that adding outlets wasn't simple. The father seemed baffled. "How do people charge their stuff?" he asked. My friend suggested they take turns or use a power strip. The father said, "We shouldn't have to plan around old infrastructure." But that's exactly what you do when you travel. You adapt. The family ended up buying 3 power strips from a nearby store and complained in their review that the hotel wasn't modern enough. Another guest my friend dealt with asked why the hotel didn't have ice machines on every floor. In the US, this is standard. In Europe, it's rare. Most Europeans don't drink ice-cold beverages the way Americans do. The guest couldn't accept this. He asked the front desk for ice 3 times a day. Eventually, my friend just gave him a small bucket of ice from the bar each morning. He still left a review saying the hotel lacked basic amenities. To him, ice machines were basic. To Europeans, they're unnecessary. I was at a dinner party in Brussels when an American expat started complaining about how hard it was to get things done in Europe. "Everything closes on Sundays," she said. "Banks have limited hours. Even the post office is only open until 5. A Belgian friend at the table smiled and said, "That's because we believe people should have time off." The American woman argued that it was inefficient. "What if you need something urgently?" she asked. The Belgian shrugged. "Then you plan ahead." This idea that convenience should sometimes take a back seat to quality of life was something she struggled to accept. She had been living in Brussels for 2 years and still hadn't adjusted to the slower pace. I also remember a conversation I overheard in a grocery store in Vienna. An American man was asking a cashier why the store didn't have baggers. In the US, someone bags your groceries for you. In most of Europe, you do it yourself. The cashier explained this, and the man said, "That's weird. What do baggers do here then?" The cashier looked confused. "We don't have baggers," she said. The man stood there for a moment, then slowly started bagging his own groceries while muttering about inefficiency. Behind him, a line of people waited patiently, all bagging their own groceries without complaint, because that's just how it works. I was working at a train station information desk in Brussels when an American tourist came up holding a printed ticket. He looked stressed. "My train leaves in 5 minutes, but I can't find the platform," he said. I glanced at his ticket and told him it was platform 7. He looked around, panicked. "Where's platform 7? I pointed to the large sign overhead that listed all the platforms with arrows. He squinted at it. "Why isn't there a gate number?" he asked. I explained that European trains don't have gates like airport terminals. You just go to the platform. He seemed confused by this. "So I just walk there?" "Yes," I said. He rushed off, still looking uncertain, like he expected someone to check his ticket before he boarded. No one did. You just get on the train. This system, which is normal across Europe, completely baffled him. Another American traveler asked me why his ticket didn't have a seat number. I looked at it and explained that regional trains in Belgium don't assign seats. You just sit wherever there's space. He didn't like this answer. "What if the train is full?" he asked. "Then you stand," I said, "or wait for the next train." He looked horrified. "That's not a real system," he said. "But it is. Millions of Europeans use it every day without issue." He ended up missing his train because he spent 10 minutes arguing with me about why the system should be different. My cousin works for a train company in Germany and told me about an American passenger who got on an ICE train without validating his ticket. In Germany, some tickets need to be validated before you board. The conductor came through and asked to see his ticket. The American showed it, and the conductor explained that it wasn't validated. The passenger got defensive. "I bought it online," he said. "It's valid." The conductor tried to explain the validation process, but the passenger insisted he had done everything right. Eventually, he had to pay a fine. He argued that the system was a scam designed to trick tourists, but the reality was that he just didn't read the instructions on his ticket. I once helped an American couple who were trying to figure out why their flight from Rome to London was so cheap. They had booked with a budget airline and were excited about the €50 fare. When they got to the airport, they were charged extra for their carry-on bags, their seat selection, and even printing their boarding passes at the counter. By the time they boarded, they had paid nearly €200 total. They were furious. "This is false advertising," the husband said. I explained that budget airlines in Europe charge for everything separately. The base fare is just the seat. Everything else costs extra. He said that in America, airlines include baggage in the ticket price. I pointed out that American airlines also charge for bags now, but he insisted it was different. They left feeling scammed, even though all the fees were clearly listed on the airline's website. Another traveler I met in Copenhagen asked me why his Uber was so expensive. He had taken a 15-minute ride and paid almost €40. I explained that Copenhagen has high taxi rates and that Uber isn't much cheaper than regular taxis here. He seemed shocked. "In the US, Uber is the cheap option," he said. I suggested he use public transport next time. He said he didn't feel safe on buses. I asked why. He didn't have a real answer. He just assumed public transport in Europe was sketchy, even though Copenhagen's metro is spotless and efficient. He kept using Uber and kept complaining about the cost. I was once on a train in France, sitting across from an American tourist who was panicking because his phone wasn't working. He kept trying to make calls, but nothing went through. Finally, he asked me for help. I asked if he had activated international roaming. He looked at me blankly. "What's that?" he asked. I explained that US phone plans don't automatically work in Europe. You need to either activate roaming or buy a local SIM card. He seemed genuinely surprised by this. "My phone should just work," he said. I told him that's not how international travel works. He spent the rest of the trip trying to find Wi-Fi hotspots and complaining about how inconvenient Europe was. My friend who works at a car rental agency in Portugal told me about an American customer who refused to rent a manual transmission car. The problem was that most rental cars in Europe are manual. The customer insisted on an automatic. My friend explained that automatics cost more and weren't always available. The customer got frustrated. "Why doesn't Europe use automatics?" he asked. My friend said that manual cars are cheaper, more fuel efficient, and most Europeans learn to drive them. The customer eventually paid extra for an automatic but left a bad review saying the rental company was behind the times. I also remember an American traveler at the airport in Milan who was upset because his flight was delayed by 30 minutes. He went to the gate agent and demanded compensation. The agent politely explained that EU regulations require compensation only for delays over 3 hours. He argued that in America, airlines give you vouchers for any delay. The agent said this wasn't America. He asked to speak to a manager. The manager told him the same thing. He eventually gave up, but spent the entire delay complaining loudly to other passengers about how European airlines don't care about customers. I was working as a tour guide in Athens when an American tourist asked me if Greece was part of Italy. I thought he was joking. He wasn't. He explained that he thought all the ancient ruins were in Italy, so Greece must be nearby. I pulled out a map and showed him that Greece and Italy are separate countries. He looked embarrassed, but then asked, "So is Greek like Italian?" I explained that Greek and Italian are completely different languages from different language families. He nodded slowly, processing this information. Later in the tour, he asked if the Parthenon was built by the Romans. I reminded him that we were in Greece, not Rome. He said, "Yeah, but didn't the Romans build everything old?" This was a college-educated man in his 40s. Another American tourist on the same tour asked me why Greeks didn't speak English as their first language. I said, "Because we're in Greece." She clarified that she meant, why didn't they learn English in school and just use it all the time since everyone speaks English? Anyway, I explained that Greek people speak Greek because it's their native language, and while many learn English, they're not going to abandon their own language. She said it would just be easier for everyone if more countries used English as their primary language. The other tourists on the tour, who were from Germany, France, and Japan, just stared at her. I once overheard an American couple in a museum in Amsterdam arguing about whether Holland and the Netherlands were the same thing. The husband insisted they were different countries. The wife said she thought Holland was the capital. Neither was quite right. Holland is a region within the Netherlands, and Amsterdam is the capital. They debated this for 10 minutes in front of a museum placard that literally explained the difference. They never looked at the placard. They just kept arguing based on what they thought was true. My friend who works at a hostel in Prague told me about an American guest who asked what language people spoke in Czechoslovakia. My friend gently corrected him that Czechoslovakia split into 2 countries, the Czech Republic and Slovakia, back in 1993. The guest seemed surprised. "When did that happen?" he asked. My friend repeated, 1993. The guest paused and said, "Oh, I wasn't born yet." He was 24 years old. He had lived his entire life in a world where Czechoslovakia didn't exist and still thought it did. Another American traveler I met in Budapest asked me if Hungarians were Asian. I asked what made him think that. He said he had heard that Hungarians came from Mongolia or something. There is a historical theory about distant connections, but modern Hungarians are Europeans who speak a unique language. I tried to explain this, but he kept insisting that Hungarian people look Asian. They don't. He had created an entire false narrative in his head based on something he half remembered from a podcast. I was at a cafe in Dublin when an American tourist asked the barista if people in Ireland spoke Irish all the time. The barista said most people speak English in daily life, though Irish is taught in schools and some communities use it regularly. The tourist seemed disappointed. "So you're basically just British people?" she asked. The barista's face went cold. "No," he said firmly. "We're Irish." She didn't understand why that was a sensitive topic. She just thought Ireland and Britain were interchangeable. The barista didn't bother explaining centuries of history. He just made her coffee in silence. My cousin, who studied in London, told me about an American classmate who asked if the UK used euros. When my cousin said no, the UK uses pounds, the classmate asked why. My cousin explained that the UK never adopted the euro. The classmate said, "But you're in Europe." My cousin clarified that being in Europe doesn't mean you automatically use the euro. Several countries have their own currencies. The classmates seemed to think the euro was like a universal European dollar that everyone had to use. She had traveled to London without even checking what currency they used. I also met an American tourist in Barcelona who was frustrated that people spoke Spanish instead of Mexican. I asked what he meant. He said, "You know, Mexican. The language." I explained that the language is called Spanish, and it originated in Spain. He looked skeptical. "But Mexico speaks it too," he said. "Yes," I said, "because Spain colonized Mexico." He processed this for a moment and then said, "So, Spanish people speak Mexican that came from Spain?" I gave up trying to clarify. Another time, I overheard an American woman in a Swiss train station asking an employee if Switzerland was part of Germany. The employee said no, Switzerland is its own country. She asked, "But you speak German, right?" He explained that Switzerland has 4 official languages: German, French, Italian, and Romansh. She seemed overwhelmed. "Why does one country need 4 languages?" she asked. He said, "Because we have 4 language communities." She muttered something about how confusing Europe was and walked away. I was once helping an American tourist in Vienna who wanted to visit that famous German castle. I asked which one. He said, "You know, the Disney one." He meant Neuschwanstein Castle, which is in Bavaria, Germany, not Austria. I explained that Vienna is in Austria, and the castle he wanted was in a different country. He looked at a map and said, "But they're right next to each other." "Yes," I said, "but they're still different countries." He didn't understand why this mattered. "Can't I just drive there?" he asked. "You can," I said, "but it's a 5-hour drive." He thought all of Europe was the size of Texas. I was working at a bookstore in Stockholm when an American customer asked if we had any books in English. I pointed to an entire section of English language books. He seemed surprised. "I thought everyone here just read Swedish," he said. I explained that most Swedes speak English fluently and that English books are popular. He picked up a novel, looked at the price tag, and converted it to dollars in his head. $30 for a paperback?" he said. I explained that books are more expensive in Sweden because of taxes and import costs. He put it back and said, "I'll just wait till I get home." He spent the rest of his time in the store complaining about how expensive everything was, which is true. Stockholm is pricey, but instead of seeing it as a trade-off for high quality of life, he just saw it as a ripoff. Another American I met at a cafe in Lisbon told me he was disappointed by Europe. I asked why. He said, "I thought it would be more like the movies." I asked what he meant. He said he expected cobblestone streets, people in traditional clothes, everyone drinking wine at outdoor cafes all day. I pointed out that we were literally sitting at an outdoor cafe, and that Lisbon has plenty of cobblestone streets. He said, "Yeah, but it's not old enough." Lisbon is one of the oldest cities in Europe. He had built up an idea of Europe in his head that no real place could match. The thing is, none of these stories are about Americans being bad people. They're about a specific kind of traveler who shows up expecting the world to work like home and gets frustrated when it doesn't. They don't research before they go. They don't ask questions. They don't adapt. And when things don't make sense, they assume the problem is with Europe, not with their expectations. Most Americans who travel to Europe have amazing experiences. They're curious, respectful, and genuinely interested in learning about other cultures. But the ones who don't adapt, who complain constantly, who treat every difference as an inconvenience, they're the ones locals remember. They're the ones who become stories we tell each other at work. And over time, those stories add up. The frustrating part is that it's so easy to avoid. Read a little before you travel. Learn a few basic phrases. Understand that different places have different norms. Don't expect everything to cater to you. And when something surprises you, ask yourself if maybe it's not wrong, just different. Because Europe isn't broken. It's just not America. And that's exactly the point. If you found yourself nodding through this, imagine having this clarity on tap every week. That's what subscribing gives you. Not entertainment, but perspective most people never reach.